a short additional scripture. It's from the book of Acts. It says, "Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any who belonged to Jesus, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now, as he was going along and approaching Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around Saul. And he fell to the ground, and he heard a voice saying to him, 'Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me, Jesus?' He asked, 'Who are you, Lord?' And the reply came, 'I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up, enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do.'" All right, so here's a little bit interesting, little tiny quick jokes. See if you catch on quickly enough. Especially the first one. So one day, Jesus and his disciples walked into a bar. And Jesus called out to the bartender, 13 glasses of water, please. Get it? Change water into wine? Okay. One day, Jesus and his disciple walked into a restaurant. And he says, "Can we have a table for 26, please?" And the hostess says, "There are only 13 of you." But he said, "Yeah, but we're all going to sit on one side." Good for you. All right, doing what I do tends to be a projector screen onto which people will shine their internal dialogue and conflict surrounding a debate that is stewing in their psyche about God and Jesus, okay? People tend to project that upon me sometimes. When traveling, many of us ministers, especially on planes, will refrain from telling our seatmates that we are ministers. Even without asking, people will feel the need to unload their often unfinished opinions upon us, presuming that we have a need to know their instincts and their feelings. And often people are one-dimensional in their thinking about Jesus. Perhaps it's because they were forced, or they feel they were forced by their parents to endure indoctrination in the church, or they had to sit through long sermons that advised them if they didn't believe as the preacher did, they were going to hell. Well, in those unfortunate times, I smile, even when they finish with the words, "And that's why I feel so strongly about this." And I say, "Thank you very much." But what I'd like to say to them is that Jesus isn't just one thing, especially the one thing that they may have expressed upon to me, especially the thing that they may have grown to resent, because that's always what it is. You know, people are trying to unload the reason why they don't go to church or they don't believe in God or whatever it is. I mean, I didn't ask them to do that, but they feel the duty to do that. Most of the Jesus story portrays him, though, if we really look at it with unhappy eyes, let's put it that way. Jesus usually is portrayed as a suggester. Okay, let's face it. He usually suggests to us the way to go through life rather than an enforcer. It's the church that tends to be the enforcer, right? The strong-arm man, right? As we have seen today, he doesn't do that. He just doesn't do that. The words after this breakfast prove that. Now, that reading and the reading that I read aloud have very different scenarios of who Jesus is and what he does. In one moment, a person is struck down and blinded. That's Saul. He is a guy who's out there persecuting anyone who believes and follows Jesus, okay? He's actually gotten a note that says, "I can do this, all right? I can take you to jail." And while then the other moment, we have the group of disciples. They're aided by being told where to get their fish. Apparently they didn't try the right side of the boat, you know. Fishermen only fish on the left side of the boat, apparently. But he said, try the other side, and they got 153 fish, okay? So he's aiding them in that, and then he entertains them later, so much so that Peter, did you catch that? He was naked. And he put his clothes on and jumped into the water. Don't we do the opposite usually? The most interesting story we got going on here. Had to have been some special message that was being, but we have him having them so excited to see him. They're jumping off the boat. They're dragging in the nets, and they meet him on the beach, and he's entertaining them with breakfast. Now, this is the third time that Jesus in the book of John is seen by the disciples after he has been put on the cross, disappeared from the tomb, and is on the way to resurrection. Two very different meetings by people, entirely different things. This is what we might call the many and varied Jesus. Now, what's interesting about both of these encounters is that seeking Jesus was not the task at hand at the moment for either party. While Saul was on the road to Damascus to find seekers and to punish them, the disciples were clueless about what their next step was supposed to be because they've lost their leader. So, let's go fishing. Right? What else are you going to do when you don't know what to do? So two different Jesuses for two different needs. The many and varied Jesus. Without warning, Saul was confronted for his dastardly deeds. A direct intervention brought him to his knees, and how he would see the world because he was blinded would literally change how he would see the world. And without a clue, the disciples were blessed with yet another lesson. They were graced with abundance. Grace with abundance. Thank you, Jennifer, for that. They were graced with abundance, and they were fed one more time, like we see over here. Fed one more time. These two appearances reveal very different images of Jesus. One's the confronter, but one is the consoler. One demands while the other one suggests. And I'm willing to bet that all the preachers people have experienced through their lives have presented Jesus, the consoler, time and time again. But what every preacher knows is that many parishioners are more than happy to keep replaying this disciple story again and again, expecting more and more lessons before finding the motivation to head out into the world. That's one of the problems I think that the world has with churches, is that we expect everyone to come in here when they would rather have us out there. Okay? And we keep on coming back for more and more assurance, and even though we're blessed with so much in our lives, we have to keep on being reassured of what to do. And sometimes we're just like, we're frightened. I'm afraid to do what Jesus has asked me to do, but Jesus keeps on encouraging us again and again and again. And we go, is it time? Is it time? Now, unfortunately, Saul was more than happy to head out into the world. That's the hard thing. He was more than happy, but for a much more sinister purpose. Why does that happen so often? Why is it so easy to go out into the world to wreak havoc than it is to go out into the world and, dare I say, wreak consolation? Why do we get it in our heads? You know, we don't want to say that we're doing it, but we see people doing it all the time. They go out into the world, and for some reason, they're a danger to the world. Those sinister motivations feel so empowered to go out into the world when those with peaceful intent want to sit pretty in their favorite places too often. And so many a preacher will become impatient and will resort to leaning heavily on their church with Jesus the confronter, as Jesus was to Paul. And when they get all riled up and when they repeat words of confrontation, there is a certain amount of compliance that goes along with that. Sometimes people will act really quickly, but oftentimes it's only once. But then there's a serious amount of resentment and retreat of people's hearts towards the church. People don't like being told what to do, especially our kind of people. This kind of church that the Congregational church, we all know it's up to us, right? There's a big demand that, you come every Sunday and be seen and do the things and do this and that and anything that many other churches will expect you to do. But then there is the Jesus who makes numerous appearances, each time suggesting and reassuring. Remember, he had appeared twice to the disciples already in their house that they had retreated to. Jesus had invited Thomas specifically to inspect his wounds, to touch and to see that he was real. And this time, he acts as a fishing guide. He acts as a chef. He acts as a table mate. I wonder who you will be. I see you in many ways. I see you in good ways, most of all. Who will you be? And more importantly, how will you be in the world? I find it interesting that in the portrayal with Saul today, Jesus went out of his way to correct him. What I have found is that many people, when corrected, will simply brush off the criticism, claiming that they were in the right all the time. But for Saul, there was an added incentive. If he did so, he would regain his sight. Saul was unable to see the world and God's people with anything but contempt. That's what all he saw the world with, was contempt. Ugh. Somehow Saul's heart, though, was open to change. So can we be open to change as well? And disciples, well, they found Jesus to be patient but insistent. And later in that reading, Jesus not only helps catch fish, he cooks it in offering hospitality, but then he insists something upon them. That if nothing else, that the disciples would take care of the world. That's all. 3 times he asks Peter. He says, Peter, do you love me? Right? And each time he says almost the same thing. He says, feed my sheep. And then he asks them again, Peter, do you love me? Tend my sheep. Peter, a 3rd time, do you love me? Feed my sheep. Now today the stories resulted in changed attitudes and redirected lives. Even without going to look for him, Jesus reached out and found the most influential Christian teacher in Saul, who later turned to Paul, and rooted the church in what he felt would be the church's most significant job. And what is that? To feed the people. I want to congratulate this church, and I am going to be talking about it for more. We are already in many ways the feeding church in this town. And I am going to, if nothing else, strongly suggest that we become even more of a feeder. We offer, we house the backpack program. Many of us volunteer to go feed. We offer Gateway, a program that happens in a week or so, that we feed our friends from the many different group homes in the area. We feed people in many different ways, and there's so much more. That is the number one thing that I can think that we can do that would outshine anything that we could possibly do, and that is to feed people, whether they need it or not. Feed the people. Jesus is telling us that's what you should do. So this is the many and varied Jesus. The many and varied Jesus is the one who at times when we really need it is there to give us a little kick in the butt. Saul had to take it. He had to go along and be blinded and be opened, his eyes be opened because he needed to see the world in a new way. He came to the disciples and he was their friend. He was their fishing partner. He did something even beyond then. He gave them the direction of where they were supposed to go. Feed my sheep. The many and varied Jesus. There's a little song that we have sung many times before in our hymnal. And it describes the many and varied Jesus. Here, listen to some of these words of the many and many Jesus.
God of the sparrow, God of the whale, God of the swirling stars, how does the creature say all? How does the creature say praise? God of the earthquake, God of the storm, God of the trumpet blast, how does the creature say woe? How does the creature say save? God of the rainbow, God of the cross, God of the empty grave, how does the creature say grace? How does the creature say thanks? You see, God is so many things to so many people and to creation itself. Let us not find ourselves so stuck on one thing, especially if we are so fed up with something that we see God as being negative, or why can't God step in here? God has told us you should step in. So I pray that each and every one of us will step in and do that. My friends, may the Lord be with you.